April 17th, 2016, 3:47 a.m. 4 days before Prince died, he sat alone in Studio A at Paisley Park and recorded something nobody heard for 2 years. The tape was filed away in the normal archive system, labeled as just another work reel. By the time someone discovered what was actually on it, Prince was gone. When that recording was finally found in 2018, what Prince said sent shockwaves through his family and estate lawyers. It wasn't a goodbye message. It wasn't a cry for help. It was something far more haunting. Prince talking about the future he thought he still had. Making plans for the vault he would never fulfill. Leaving instructions for his family that nobody knew existed. The first person to hear it was his sister Taika, the only sibling who'd shared his entire childhood, his musical DNA, his complicated family history. What Prince said in those 12 minutes revealed he'd had a plan all along. Detailed instructions about his unreleased music, his artistic legacy, what should happen after his death. But by the time Taika heard his voice, the estate had already been at war for 2 years. And when Taika died in 2024, she took some of Prince's final secrets with her. Keep watching, because this last recording changes everything you thought you knew about Prince's final wishes. Before we continue with this incredible story, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the untold stories behind music's greatest legends. The evening of April 16th, 2016, started like many others at Paisley Park. Prince had hosted one of his legendary impromptu dance parties in the NPG Music Club, the venue space inside his compound. Fans had gathered, music played, and Prince made a brief appearance. "Wait a few days before you waste any prayers," he said with that mysterious smile he'd perfected over 4 decades. Nobody understood what he meant. Prince spoke in riddles constantly. It was part of his mystique, part of the persona he'd crafted since the beginning. But looking back, those words carried a weight that nobody could have anticipated. By midnight, the party had wound down. Prince's assistant Kirk Johnson helped clear the venue, made sure everything was secure, and prepared to lock up for the night. Prince told him he was fine, that he was going to rest, maybe do some light work in the studio. Nothing unusual. Kirk left around 1 in the morning. The security cameras show Prince moving through the building shortly after. He didn't go upstairs to his living quarters. He went down to Studio A. The control room of Studio A had been Prince's creative sanctuary for nearly 30 years. Every major album since Sign of the Times had been recorded or mixed there. The SSL mixing console was configured exactly to his specifications. The monitors were positioned at precise angles. The lighting could be adjusted to complete darkness or dim purple glow depending on his mood. This was where magic happened. At 3:47 a.m. on April 17th, 2016, Prince sat in the producer's chair and pressed record on a Studer reel-to-reel machine. The same type of machine he'd been using since the 80s, because he insisted the sound quality was superior to digital recording. For 12 minutes and 18 seconds, Prince spoke into a Neumann U87 microphone positioned directly in front of him. His voice was tired but clear, reflective but purposeful. He wasn't performing. He wasn't creating a character. This was just Prince Rogers Nelson, alone at 4 in the morning, speaking thoughts he'd apparently been holding for a long time. What he said on that tape would remain unknown to the world for 2 years. But the fact that he made it at all tells us something crucial. Prince knew something was shifting. When he finished recording, Prince did something unusual. Normally, engineers handled all the archiving and labeling. But that morning, Prince labeled the tape himself. He wrote directly on the tape box in his distinctive handwriting. Then he filed it away in the archive system, in the normal rotation with thousands of other work reels that filled Paisley Park storage rooms. Then Prince powered down Studio A. took the elevator upstairs to his living quarters, and apparently went to sleep. 4 days later, that same elevator would become the location where his body was found. The Paisley Park vault had become legendary long before Prince died. He'd spent 40 years filling it with unreleased music. 8,000 songs, according to estimates from engineers who'd worked there. Enough material to release one album per year for a century. The vault represented everything Prince had created, but withheld. Every artistic choice he'd made to keep something private, rather than share it with a world he didn't always trust. When Prince died without a will, chaos erupted immediately. 6 siblings and half-siblings filed claims to the estate. Lawyers descended. Everyone wanted control. Everyone had different ideas about what should happen to the unreleased material, and nobody knew the combination to the vault. On May 15, 2016, police and estate representatives brought in a safecracker from Portland, Oregon, named Dave McComey. The vault door was a Mosler, one of the most impregnable safe designs ever created. It took hours to crack. When the door finally swung open at 7:10 that evening, everyone held their breath. What they found inside launched years of legal battles, preservation projects, and debates about artistic legacy. But they didn't find everything. Because the most important recording Prince had made wasn't locked in the secret vault. It was sitting in plain sight in the normal archive system, filed away with 50,000 other reels that engineers had been cataloging since the 1980s. In early 2018, the estate hired archivists to begin the massive project of digitizing Prince's recorded output. Everything needed to be preserved properly, transferred to modern formats, cataloged in detail. It was painstaking work. On a Tuesday afternoon in March 2018, an archivist named Jennifer Chen threaded a tape onto a playback machine. The label read, "Personal, 4/17/16, 3:47 a.m., in Prince's handwriting. Jennifer expected another instrumental experiment, another midnight improvisation. She pressed play. Prince's voice came through the speakers. Not singing, speaking. Directly into the microphone, as if addressing someone specific. Jennifer's hands froze on the controls. She listened for 30 seconds, then stopped the tape. She didn't have authorization to hear this. Whatever this was, it wasn't a normal work reel. This was something else entirely. Jennifer immediately contacted the estate lawyer overseeing the archive project. Within 2 hours, a small group had assembled at Paisley Park. Estate representatives, Comerica Bank trustees, and one family member who'd been requested specifically because Prince had mentioned her by name on the tape. Tyka Nelson. Tyka Nelson had been living in a state of complicated grief since April 21, 2016. They'd been close as children, distant during Prince's rise to superstardom, then reconnected in recent years as adults who'd both lived complicated lives and found their way back to family. But Taika had also been angry. Furious at the circumstances of Prince's death. Furious at the doctors who'd prescribed medication so carelessly. Furious at the people around Prince who'd enabled his isolation. Furious at herself for not intervening more forcefully when she'd seen him looking gaunt and exhausted. And perhaps most of all, furious that Prince had left no will, no instructions, nothing to guide them through the aftermath. The estate battle had torn the family apart. Lawyers filed motions. Siblings who barely knew Prince suddenly appeared claiming inheritance rights. The press turned it into a circus. And through it all, Taika had wondered why her brother, so meticulous about his music, so controlling about every aspect of his artistic output, had apparently made zero plans for his death. When the estate lawyer called Taika that Tuesday and said they'd found a recording, that Prince talked about her specifically, that he'd left instructions after all, Taika felt something break open inside her chest. Hope mixed with dread, mixed with grief that had never quite healed. She drove to Paisley Park in a fog. She'd been there countless times over the years. For parties, for family gatherings, for the memorial service after Prince died, where thousands of people had gathered outside while the family said private goodbyes inside. But walking into Studio A that afternoon felt different. The control room had been preserved exactly as Prince left it. His handwritten notes still scattered across the mixing console, his purple symbol emblazoned on equipment, the chair where he'd sat for 30 years, creating the soundtrack of multiple generations. The estate lawyer explained what they knew. The tape was 12 minutes and 18 seconds, recorded April 17th at 3:47 a.m., 4 days before Prince died. He spoke about the vault, about his plans, about the family, about Taika specifically. The lawyer pressed play. Prince's voice filled the control room. Taika's legs went weak. She sat down hard in the nearest chair, which happened to be Prince's chair, the producer's seat where he'd sat when he made this recording 2 years earlier. And for 12 minutes and 18 seconds, Taika listened to her brothers speak from beyond the grave. The content of Prince's final recording has never been fully released to the public. What's known comes from the few people who've heard it and the careful statements Tyka Nelson made in subsequent years before her death in 2024. But the broad strokes paint a picture that's both heartbreaking and revealing about who Prince was in his final days. Prince opened the recording by stating his full name and the date. He knew exactly what he wanted to say. He talked first about the vault, the legendary archive of unreleased music that everyone wondered about. Prince explained that the vault wasn't random. It wasn't just songs he'd abandoned or forgotten. Every piece of music in there had been placed deliberately. Prince talked about wanting the vault releases to be handled with care, not dumped onto the market for quick profit, not released in ways that would compromise his artistic vision. He'd spent 40 years carefully curating what the public heard, maintaining complete control over his image and output in ways that cost him millions of dollars and countless business relationships. The idea of that control being lost after his death clearly troubled him, brought him deeply. Then Prince talked about his family, about growing up in Minneapolis, about his parents' complicated marriage, about the musical DNA that ran through the Nelson bloodline. He talked about Taika specifically, about memories from childhood that only the two of them shared. The most haunting part of the recording, according to those who heard it, was when Prince discussed his health. He didn't explicitly say he was dying, but he talked about pain, about his body wearing down after decades of performances that would have destroyed most people. And then Prince talked about hope, about plans for the future, about believing he had time to organize things properly, to set up structures that would protect his music after he was gone. He mentioned wanting to create a foundation. "I'm not ready to go yet," Prince said near the end of the recording, according to Tika's later recollection. "Too much left to do. Too much music still in here." He apparently tapped his head at that point, a gesture captured in audio as a soft thump against the microphone. The recording ended with Prince saying he was going to rest for a few hours, then get back to work. He had rehearsals coming up, things to organize, plans to make. 4 days later, Prince was dead. And the future he'd imagined, the careful organization he'd planned, the protective structures he'd wanted to build, none of it had materialized in time. When the tape ended, Tyka Nelson sat in complete silence for 5 full minutes. Finally, Taika asked one question. Why didn't anyone find this sooner? The answer was devastating in its simplicity. Because Prince had filed it in the normal archive system, not locked in the vault with the precious unreleased music, not hidden away in some secret location, just placed on a shelf with thousands of other reels, labeled in his handwriting, sitting there waiting to be discovered during routine archiving work. Whatever the reason, the timing of the discovery created an impossible situation. By March 2018, the estate had been in chaos for nearly 2 years. Multiple posthumous releases had already been announced. Business deals had been negotiated. The estate had made decisions about what music to release and when. decisions that may or may not have aligned with Prince's wishes as expressed in the recording. Tyka Nelson now held proof that Prince had left instructions, detailed, specific instructions about his artistic legacy. And much of what the estate had done contradicted those wishes. The legal implications were enormous. The estate lawyers made their position clear. The recording was private. It shouldn't be released. It would only create more problems, more conflict, more pain for everyone involved. They suggested that Taika keep the tape's existence quiet, at least until the major estate issues were resolved. But Taika faced an agonizing moral dilemma. Her brother had trusted her, had specifically mentioned her in his final recording, had expressed wishes about how his music should be handled. Was she supposed to ignore that? Pretend she hadn't heard his voice laying out clear instructions? Allow the estate to continue making decisions that Prince himself had said he didn't want? For the next 6 years, Taika wrestled with this burden. She listened to the tape occasionally, never more than a few times per year, always alone, always with the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. She gave hints in interviews that Prince had left some guidance, that he'd had plans. But she never revealed the tape's existence publicly. The estate continued its work. Albums were released, documentaries were made. Paisley Park was opened as a museum. Business deals were signed with streaming services. And through it all, Taika carried the knowledge that her brother had wanted things done differently. Those closest to Taika said the burden of the tape wore on her constantly. Taika had spent her whole life in her famous brother's shadow. And now, even after his death, she remained bound to him through this secret that she couldn't share but couldn't forget. In November 2024, Tyka Nelson died. She was 64 years old. In her final months, Taika had made arrangements for what would happen to certain private materials after her death, including instructions about the tape. According to sources close to the estate, Taika had decided that a written description of the tape's contents could be shared, but the audio itself should remain sealed for 50 years after Prince's death, per standard archival practices for sensitive personal materials. She believed Prince deserved privacy even in death, that his final reflective moments shouldn't become public entertainment, that some things were too sacred for consumption. When Taika died, she took with her the full emotional context of hearing her brother's voice from beyond the grave. She took the memories of childhood that only she and Prince had shared. She took her personal interpretation of what Prince had meant in his final recording, the nuances of his voice, the weight of his words, the hope mixed with resignation that apparently colored his tone. And most importantly, Taika took answers to questions that will now never be fully resolved. What exactly did Prince say about specific unreleased albums? Which collaborators did he want contacted? What were his specific wishes about Paisley Park becoming a museum? Did he leave instructions about his personal possessions, his wardrobe, his instruments? The tape apparently contained details that Taika never fully shared, details that died with her. The existence of this recording fundamentally changes how we understand Prince's final days. For 2 years after his death, the narrative had been that Prince left nothing. No will, no instructions, no guidance. That he was so consumed by immediate survival, by managing chronic pain, by preparing for performances his body couldn't sustain, that he hadn't thought about death at all. But the tape reveals something different. Prince was thinking about the future, about his legacy, about what would happen to his music. He wasn't in denial. He was trying to prepare. He just ran out of time before he could formalize those preparations in legally binding documents. And the recording session at 3:47 a.m. on April 17th wasn't just another late-night work session. It was Prince trying to leave breadcrumbs, trying to create a record of his wishes that his family could find later. He must have known, on some level, that he was running out of time. The tape was his attempt to beat the clock. The recording also changes how we understand the estate battles that followed. The fighting among heirs, the conflicting business decisions, the debates about posthumous releases, all of it happened in the absence of Prince's actual voice. But the tape proves that Prince did express wishes. Clear, specific wishes about his music and legacy. The fact that those wishes weren't legally binding, that they were recorded on audio tape rather than written in a proper will, that they weren't discovered until after crucial decisions had been made. That's the real tragedy. Not that Prince didn't plan, but that his planning came too late to matter in the ways he'd hoped. Finally, the tape reveals the relationship between Prince and Taika in a new light. For years, Taika had been portrayed as just another family member caught up in estate drama. But Prince trusted her specifically, mentioned her by name, wanted her involved in decisions about his music. That trust created an impossible burden for Taika. But it also shows the depth of their bond in ways the public never fully understood. The fact that Taika chose to keep the tape private, to protect Prince's vulnerability even after death, even when releasing it could have vindicated her own position in estate battles, shows the kind of loyalty that runs deeper than money or publicity. Taika honored her brother's privacy over her own interests, and she carried that burden until it literally helped end her life. When the full story of Prince's final recording eventually becomes public, decades from now, when the 50-year seal expires, historians will have access to his actual voice from 4 days before death. But they'll never have what Taika had. The immediate emotional impact of hearing her brother's voice for the first time after 2 years of grief. The shock of discovering he'd left instructions after all. The impossible weight of holding secrets that could change everything. The burden of knowing what Prince wanted, but being unable to make it happen. That lived experience died with Tyka Nelson in 2024. And perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some things are meant to remain between siblings, between people who shared blood and childhood, and the strange journey of watching one family member become a global icon while the rest remained ordinary. Perhaps Prince's final message to his sister was always meant to be just that. A message between brother and sister, not content for public consumption. The tape exists, archived, preserved, sealed for decades. But in the end, death doesn't respect plans. Death doesn't wait for proper documentation. Death comes when it comes, and all the recordings and wishes and instructions in the world can't change that fundamental truth. Prince ran out of time. And his final message became another piece of the legend, another mystery, another reminder that even the most controlled artist ultimately can't control everything. The story of Prince's last recording is the story of all of us, really. Trying to prepare for an unknowable future. Trying to leave something meaningful behind. Trying to control how we're remembered. And learning too late that the universe has its own timeline that doesn't align with our careful plans. Tyka Nelson understood that. She lived with that knowledge for 6 years. And when she died, she made peace with it. Some secrets stay secret. Some messages remain private. Some voices from the past speak only to those who were meant to hear them. And maybe that's exactly what Prince would have wanted all along.